Hi everyone. Today I want to go over something about tuning a 2-cycle engine. Now, a lot of this does overlap with a 4-cycle, but this one specifically is going to be done on a 2-cycle, so there's that. Now, on majority of 2-cycles, some of them are set, and that's just how it is. There's going to be adjustment needles. This side goes to the carb, or excuse me, to the intake. This is on the filter side. So when you have the needles closest to the engine is always the low. That one's always the high. The low does idle, that one does full RPMs, and then the mixture between the two of them, they just help each other out. Sometimes they will have letters, like this one does have an H, so that helps. This is going to be an idle set. That just controls the idle speed of the engine, nothing to do with fuel. So on a 2-cycle, if it's running rich, it's going to be pumping out a lot of smoke. It can die. The RPMs can go very, very low. It's never going to really reach its full potential. Now, very first thing is, when the only reason why you would really have to do this is if it's starting to kind of bog down, if you put a new carb on, if you cleaned it and you took out the needles and you're not exactly sure. The sheer act of cleaning it potentially can cause you to have to adjust it just because it's now running differently than it was before. So there's always a possibility of that. So you're going to want to do this for a couple of reasons. So whatever reason it is, we want to make sure it's going to run appropriately and smoothly. We don't want it to run rich, and we don't want it to run lean. Lean is going to be running too hot and just not enough power. Rich is going to cause there to be a buildup of carbon and also not going to have enough power. So there's all that. Now, I mentioned before, some carbs are non-adjustable, or are adjustable, like the one I have with the needles. Some of them will be adjustable even though it doesn't look like it. For instance, this style of carburetor, the adjustment needle for low is here and then main's there. Sometimes that is not there, and sometimes you can't get into that one. So that would be a fixed jet carb. If that's what you have, you would either want to replace it with an adjustable one, or you're going to want to get micro drill bits and drill it out, knowing that you are never going to be able to go lean again. It's always going to be that mixture. You can always richen it up, but you can't really make it leaner. You potentially could rig up something. I've seen solder used and just drill another jet, but that's really difficult for something this size. Next thing that we're going to want to check is the fuel level. If the fuel filter in your tank is not touching fuel, you're going to have a problem. If your primer bulb is not priming and not having fuel in it, that's a problem. You need to make sure you have a working, clean, good carburetor. That's the very first and important step. Next, you want to make sure your fuel lines are okay. Cracked lines, no good. Make sure everything's in good working order. You need to look at your carb and see what style it is. Mine, all you need is a flathead. That's it. It's pretty simple. Majority of the idle set screw is going to be a Phillips. Sometimes it's different. If you have some that have like a plastic piece on there, you can break that off, and it's usually like a flathead or something on there. If you do not, they make these special tuning screwdrivers, I'm guessing. They usually come in a toolkit like this in a big pack. So if you look down there, you see something that's not normal, and you see like a weird shape or something with a lot of spines on it, you can go ahead and that's usually pretty cheap. It's like a couple bucks. You can potentially take a Dremel and put a slot in there. Just be careful, because you are working around fuel. That's not aluminum, at least not what you're going to be cutting into. It's probably steel and will spark, so be careful on that. So now we know we have a good carburetor that's clean and functional, good fuel lines. Fuel level is where it needs to be. We have our tuning utensils. we are good to go. I'm not going to be able to show all this because of the cover, but more or less what I'm going to do is I already have the idle pretty high, and I'm going to get it started. Now I've already had this started and I got this warmed up. You do not want to do this on a cold engine. You want to warm it up a little bit. If it may take some attempts to turn it off and on, off and on, off and on, off and on. If that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. You can give a full throttle, but to get it started, but don't run it at full throttle when it's cold. That can potentially damage the engine. So now that it's warm, especially since if you just took it out for like the spring and just not running right, especially if it just bogs under high RPM, just let it idle, let it get warm. First things first, the low screw, the one closest to the to the engine, I'm going to run it out until it starts to kind of bog, and then I'm going to run it in until it starts to get a little bit very, very high, and then once it starts to bog again, I'm going to go back to high, and then once I get to the highest RPM, I'm going to do a little turn out to make it a little rich, and I'm going to leave it at that point. I'm going to do the exact same thing with the high end. Run it out until it starts to bog, and then I'm going to going to run it in until it starts to bog, and then run it out till it gets to full RPM as the fastest I can possibly get it, and then I'm going to richen it up a little bit past that so the RPM is lower. You do not want to have full speed. It's just going to cause damage. You want it to have a little richness. That's the key. And then I'm going to check the idle again, because that could potentially have changed a little bit after adjusting the high. At that point, once I find it, I might go back and forth 2 or 3 times. At that point, I'm going to take the idle set and adjust the idle speed what I like. Now, you do want to rev it up. It shouldn't bog when you first give it full throttle. After you're done, if it does, you need to keep on adjusting or look at your fuel supply. So I'm going to try to say this when I'm doing it, but I don't know how well you're going to hear me, so I want to give you that helpful tip. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. It's a little hard because of how this has to work, but you know, I'm the one who has to do it, not you. Like I said, this is already warm. I don't think I need that, but let's try. good idle. It's not smoking. Give it some gas. Whew. Okay, well, that's really about it. So, recap. I went to low, then I went to high, went back to low, and then I double checked the high because the low will influence the high. The high sometimes will influence the low. Very rarely, though. It's almost always the other way around because when the engine's under full RPM and load, it's using both the high and the low to get the correct mixture. So adjusting on the low is going to affect the high almost every time. What are some potential problems that are going to run into? One, you're going to run into the problem I had that with the engine running, it's going to be very difficult to kind of tune. If that's causing you to be, or causing issues for you like it did me, do what I did. You're going to have to just kind of give it some throttle, listen to it. Some key things to kind of look for, as you saw, it was kind of spitting. That is usually a sign of it being a little rich. It could be lean, but in this case, I believe it was rich. And when I leaned it out, it went away. So I still want it to be a little rich, but I don't want it to be that rich. So next thing I want to go over is if you are seeing a lot of smoke, that's not normal. You are too rich. Unless you just started your engine, it should be cleaning out a lot. It should be cleaning up a lot faster. So once it gets to a fairly decent operating temperature, there should be little to no smoke at all. If there is, and assuming you didn't flood it or anything, your carb is too rich, or your fuel mixture is too high in oil, and that's just not a good idea in general. If you are at that point where you get going and then you notice it goes really high and then really low, you could have a vacuum leak somewhere. The very first and quickest and easiest thing to do is look at the gasket in between the carburetor and the intake. If it looks to be loose, broken, ripped, anything like that, then that's your problem. Sometimes there's a plate over the carburetor or over the intake. Sometimes it bolts directly to the actual cylinder head. If there is a plate, check that one as well. If that's not the case, then you could have a seal problem, and that's going to take a whole lot more of a repair. So if you have a lot of fluctuation, you can't quite dial it in, you have a vacuum leak somewhere. Other than that, that's generally how you tune a 2-cycle. You should do this under load as well. Like, I'm going to take this out and I'm going to load test it. If it does not perform well, I'm not going to be too concerned over idle, because idle you're probably not going to be working anyway. At least I just hope you're not. But under RPM, if I notice it's a lot bogging or has a little bit low of power, I will take my adjustment utensil, whatever it is, and make some finer adjustments. Any type of 2-cycle, with the exception of maybe a leaf blower that I could think of, will have some type of load. For instance, a weed eater, you should have a full head of line when you do your tuning. A chainsaw, that one's hard because you're going to want to really be cutting wood. So I would do this. I'd put it a little rich on the high end, and then I would try cutting. If it's not doing well, or it's pumping out too much smoke, or it's not having enough power, or you just notice there's a problem, you're going to want to make your fine adjustments at that point. Other equipment, whatever load it is, just make sure that your final tune is under the load. And majority of the time, like I said, you're only going to have to adjust the high. If you only have one screw that adjusts both, let's say for instance this one did, then you just have to adjust one. A lot of weed eaters, lower end weed eaters, will have that bonus, I suppose you can call it. And you know, that's just how it is. Like, those never really will run right, in my opinion, but you can get it pretty good. Just do the same thing under load. Try it, whatever you need to do. Do this step first inside with ventilation, or outside, doesn't matter, and then take your machine or equipment to whatever load that you need to take it to. Make your final adjustments there. If you follow these steps, you should be able to tune this no problem. You might have to do this in the fall or springtime, depending on your weather. If you move, you're going to have to do this. There's all kinds of situations. So whatever situation is, if you follow these steps, your equipment will run good, and you don't have to worry about it running lean or rich, causing unneeded and expensive repairs. So hopefully this helped. If this did help, leave a thumbs up. If you have any questions, definitely subscribe. Catch me on my next video. Follow me on Instagram at SmallEngine101, and I will see you later. Have a good night. It's been a couple days later, and this is how you know if you tuned it right. When it's cold, it's about 40, maybe 38, 39 degrees, and it's been about 4 days since I've even done anything. It's now Wednesday. I think I worked on it Saturday. Yeah. Okay, so today's not quite 4 days, but still. On. Choke is on. Give it a couple healthy primes. Now these usually don't start in the first pull to begin with, but let's see. Ooh. There we go. Okay, well, one of the unfortunate things about tuning is if you're going to pull a lot, you might get a battle scar. So, okay, this is the real end. Have a good night. See you later.